Good morning. My name is Jim Lyng, and the title of my presentation today is The Role of Emerging Technologies in the Sustainable Processing of Quality Foods for the Future. I'll begin with a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. Essentially, I'm going to touch on three areas. The first is emerging food processing technologies. The second is sustainable processing. And the third area I'll touch upon is producing quality food. Now, I think it's appropriate to present these three areas in the form of a Venn diagram, as there's significant overlap between them, which I'll hopefully demonstrate to you today. Also, the three areas in this Venn diagram actually touch upon 9 of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'd like to make a quick distinction between evolving and emerging technologies. If we compare cave to current in terms of physical methods that were used to preserve foods, in cave times, the methods used were heating by fire or boiling, cooling for those living in cooler climates, and drying for those living in warmer environments. Now, significant evolution in heating, cooling, and drying has occurred since cave times, and indeed significant evolution has even occurred since the advent of food technology in 1809, when Nicholas Appert developed what is a forerunner of our modern day canning. But still, today, if you go to the supermarket and you examine the contents of your trolley, you'll find a significant number of products which are either heat processed, are preserved by cooling or freezing, or are dried. So basically, significant evolution has occurred in heating, cooling, and drying over the years, but no silver bullet technology has emerged to displace these physical methods. In today's presentation, I'm going to focus on 6 emerging technologies that I work with, but I acknowledge there are many others, including high pressure, cold plasma, and ozone, which are also very promising. To quickly mention them by name, the first is pulse electric fields, which involves extremely high voltage electricity being passed directly through foods. We've also got ultrasound, which involves high intensity sound, which is above the threshold of human hearing. And then you've got a group of light technologies, including UV light, blue light, and high intensity light pulses. Now, these three are classed as non-thermal because their mechanism of action is something other than heat. The second group includes moderate electric fields, which involves lower field strengths than what's applied in pulse electric fields, and also radio frequency and microwave heating. And these three are classed as thermal technologies, but they heat products by electroheating mechanisms which differ from conventional methods. What do these things do to foods? Well, they do new things that conventional methods don't do. Pulse electric fields induce puncture holes in cells by a phenomenon known as electroporation. Ultrasound induces cavitation and cause sonochemistry type reactions in foodstuffs. Light induces disruption at the level of DNA and induces the production of secondary metabolites in some instances. And the three thermal technologies generate heat within the product volume by slightly different mechanisms, but they heat the product internally or generate heat by friction within the inside of the product. I started my PhD in 1991, and I did, in preparation for today, I did a quick search in the Web of Science, relating to the number of publications which have emerged over the years. When I started my PhD, there were 3 papers in 1991, in the year 1991, which touched upon one or more of these technologies. The rate of production and research of papers has grown exponentially since that time. And last year, there was 593 publications produced on these technologies and their application to foods. So we're now at a point at the end of 2020 where there was 3,560 publications involving these technologies and their application to foods. With the vast amount of information that's available to us now in this huge volume of scientific publications, could we say that these technologies have now emerged, or are they still emerging? There's no doubt there's a lot known, there's a lot of knowledge. Sometimes I find the amount of information that's available is nearly overwhelming, that there's just so much of it to go through. However, market uptake is a different scenario. And there's a terminology used around that called the valley of death when it comes to the uptake of new technologies. So it's one thing being on this side of the bridge and having all the knowledge, but to get to the other side of the bridge, it requires some additional effort. So to cross this bridge over the valley of death, one key element is stakeholder engagement. And this basically involves researchers and our equipment manufacturers interacting with key stakeholder groups. And these stakeholder groups include technical people from industry who tend to be very, very enthused by new technologies, and then the executive people with purchasing power from the food industry who sometimes tend to be a bit more conservative about new technologies. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. We've also got regulatory bodies who have to be satisfied that the technologies are safe. Public good bodies will also have a view. And of course, let's not forget the consumers, because consumers have had major influences in the area of food processing in the past. For example, the whole irradiation of foods, really because of consumer rejection, has largely been, to a large extent, abandoned or has certainly not achieved its full potential as a processing technology. So in engaging with these stakeholders then, the questions are different to what you'd find in scientific publications. They're interested in scalability, energy efficiency, are the residues produced, return on investment, cost versus benefit, product quality, throughput, environmental impact, benefit for them of their use in terms of waste streams and so on. So a very different set of questions need to be addressed, to engage with these stakeholders and satisfy their curiosities. If you put the time in, and if you have the right application, and if you satisfactorily answer those questions, well, then you reach a point where your technology gets taken up by industry, and effectively it's emerged and is used in a commercial setting. The next point I want to come on to is the whole area of sustainable processing. And there's a whole area known as green food processing, and it's based on the discovery and design of technical processes which do a number of things. The first thing they do is they reduce energy. The second thing they do is they reduce water consumption. The third thing they do is they allow recycling of byproducts through biorefineries and things like that. And of course, the fourth thing they must do is they must ensure a safe and high quality product at the end of the day. Now, many, but not all, many emerging technologies, however, tick some or all of these boxes. So staying with the theme of green food processing, I'd like to refer back to a story I told at our industry day last October. And I described the use of pulse electric fields in the softening of potatoes as part of a French fry manufacturing process. And this is a very successful application for pulse electric fields. Now, rather than repeat the story as I told it before, I'm going to describe it in a different way today to show the overlap between an emerging food processing technology and a sustainable process. And I'll start with a description of the conventional softening method. The method begins with water, which is delivered to a steam boiler. This is a gas steam boiler, so there's a certain amount of emissions associated with that. That boiler produces the steam for heating the process. That steam is delivered along a steam line. There'll be a certain amount of energy loss from the steam in transportation down that line, and it's delivered to a heat exchanger. And that heat exchanger then is used to indirectly heat the processed water. That processed water then is delivered into a vessel where you have a ratio of about 60% water to about 40% potatoes. And the potatoes let sit in water at 60 degrees C for 30 minutes to soften them prior to cutting, to ensure that they don't split or break during the cutting operation. Now, as you can see from the diagram, there's a certain amount of gas emissions associated with that. The use of water is quite significant, both in terms of the boiler and in terms of the transport water. It's indirect in how it uses heat at the heat exchanger, and you've got a certain amount of heat loss at points along the actual steam lines and so on. The PEF method is very, very different. Firstly, it's non-thermal, so it doesn't involve any heat. The ratio of potatoes to water can be, you can get away with less water here because you're only relying on water to conduct the current rather than deliver heat into the product. So you get away with up to about 70% potatoes and about 30% water. So the use of water is considerably reduced, both in terms of transport, and indeed there's no water at all required for the boiler. It applies high intensity electrical fields, but not exorbitantly high, moderate enough as PEF goes, and relatively low energy inputs to soften the potatoes, similar to the conventional method. So it's a more energy efficient process, and it ticks two of the boxes in terms of our greener food process because it uses less energy and uses less water. Here's an example of one of the systems. This is from a company called Lyng, which make these. When I last checked with them, they had 120 systems in industry and a further 35 under construction. And this 80 kilowatt system is capable of processing about 50,000 kilograms of potato per hour for this application. The second story relates to another emerged application, but this time it involves the use of PEF for non-thermal pasteurization of high quality freshly squeezed juices. And this time the approach is more geared towards the use of an emerging technology to produce a high quality product than focused solely on sustainability. Again, I'll start with a description of the conventional method. It begins once again with water, and that water is delivered into a boiler, again a gas boiler with a certain amount of emissions associated with it, and that boiler produces steam, which then passes down the steam line, so you'll have a certain amount of heat loss in the steam line, and that's delivered to the heat exchanger. So everything is the same up to this point as we had in the previous example. This time round, however, rather than using transport water which we're going to use to heat the potatoes, this time round the product itself is delivered directly into the heat exchanger. So it's separated from the steam by the heat transfer surface. So on one side you have your product, on the other side you have your steam, and your product is elevated up to the target temperature of around 72 degrees centigrade, and it's held at that temperature for about 26 seconds before being cooled down once again. So a lot shorter in terms of a process. The use of water is only related to the production of steam. You'll still have a certain amount of gas emissions from that. It still relies on indirect heating, and there'll still be a certain amount of heat losses, but certainly a lower intensity energy process than what we had before. PEF then, very similar to what I described previously. Your orange juice is delivered directly into the PEF equipment, and basically the microbes are inactivated in a non-thermal way. Again, it applies a high intensity electrical field, much higher intensity than what was required for softening potatoes. It's about 15 to 40 kilovolts per centimeter, and the energy inputs are also considerably higher as well. But the big plus with this is the quality advantage. It retains more the characteristics of a fresh juice than a heat processed juice. Again, the same system can be used for this application from the same company. They've only sold 4 of these systems worldwide for this application. And the big difference between this and the previous system, while it's the same scale of machine, the field strengths required significantly reduce the capacity. So this system can only be used to process around 5,000 litres per hour for microbial inactivation, whereas it could be used to process 50 tonnes per hour for cell softening. So overall, if we go back to our pile of refereed publications, you'll find a lot more papers which mention microbial inactivation for preservation purposes than you will find papers mentioning potato softening or cell disintegration. However, as I've highlighted to you, the equipment sales tell a different tale. Both of these applications are successful, both have emerged, but it really suggests that when there's an overwhelming energy saving, no-brainer application like potato softening, when something like that emerges, the technology is rapidly taken up and finds a big niche. However, in situations where conventional technologies exist, which do a good job, and you get marginal gains in quality or nutritional value, those gains may not be enough to encourage extremely widespread uptake, and the technology may find a smaller niche in the market. The next emerged application I will briefly mention involves the use of high intensity light for enhancing the nutritional quality of a food. In this case, the product is mushroom. Now, mushrooms grown in the wild are exposed to sunlight and UV light, which photocatalyzes the conversion of ergosterol to vitamin D2. By contrast, mushrooms grown in a tunnel are not exposed to sunlight and hence are a poor source of vitamin D2. Some years ago, it was discovered that a very short treatment with high intensity light was sufficient to form vitamin D2 in such mushrooms. And mushrooms treated in this way are now on the market. They contain your vitamin D2 requirements in a single serving. They retail at about 3 to 4 times the price of conventional mushrooms, and the label on them indicates they're exposed to a controlled light treatment. The example I've just given is an emerged example. And if we stay with the theme of nutrient enhancement for a moment, there's a vast range of endeavour in the area of next generational functional food and beverages, and these are designed to combat chronic disease. Now, the phenomenon of post-harvest abiotic stresses is well known, and these occur when plants are exposed to non-biological stimuli like wounding stress or modified atmospheres or UV light, and these stresses induce the plant or cause the plant to synthesize secondary metabolites as a defense mechanism. The beauty of that is that many of these secondary metabolites are nutraceuticals. However, post-harvest abiotic stresses are not antimicrobial by nature. Non-thermal processing technologies are antimicrobial, and examples are high-pressure processing, ultrasound, and pulse electric fields. And these extend the shelf lives of food without using high temperatures, and they allow the retention of sensory, nutritional, and nutraceutical quality. However, many of these non-thermal processing technologies can also act as post-harvest abiotic stressors. So results have been shown and papers have been published where pulse electric fields, ultrasound, and high pressure processes have all enhanced nutraceutical levels in plant products. The way the approach that's adopted is the raw material is chosen, which are good sources of these nutraceuticals. They're exposed to post-harvest abiotic stress or non-thermal processing technologies that enhances the level of nutraceuticals in the product. And then they may be exposed to a further non-thermal processing technology treatment to extend their shelf life and stabilize the products. Another area where there are a considerable amount of publications is waste stream valorization, which sits within the theme of green processing. Now, this work endeavours to extract and recover nutraceuticals from side streams such as pomace from apples, grapes, and oranges, brewers' spent grain, tomato peels, among many, many other matrices. The approach generally taken is that a side stream is chosen, attempts are made to extract the nutraceuticals from those streams with varying degrees of success. Extractions are then optimized and there's further characterization taking place, which involves both an analytical and bioaccessibility approaches. And there are a vast range of publications in this area. In some of the work, you possibly would have to question the sustainability and scalability of some of the things that have been attempted. But overall, the work is extremely interesting and a very valuable addition to the scientific literature and is likely to lead to some commercial success in the future. Just to briefly follow on from that previous slide, another area of great potential for emerging technologies is the area of the bioeconomy. And this is where renewable biological resources and their side streams are converted into food, feed, and energy. Now, I, along with a number of my colleagues, are involved in the SFI Bioorbic Centre. And the potential for emerging technologies has been explored at a number of points. Firstly, around the area of energy recovery and composting. We're using technologies like pulse electric fields to treat waste streams to enhance the rate and volume of biogas production. We're also looking at pulse electric fields and moderate electric fields to decontaminate the residual side streams that remain at the end of anaerobic digestion to allow these side streams to be used as fertilizers. Another area is the whole area of recycling and cascade extraction. I mean, an example here would be whereby microalgae are treated using a variety of physical methods to extract out compounds of differing sizes, and emerging technologies have a very definite role to play in that area. The area of residues and wastes is one I've really touched upon in the last slide, and in the interest of time, I won't say any more about it now. But of course, the whole area of heating and pasteurization and extraction and so on is going to be huge in the whole area of the biorefineries also. And it's well acknowledged that there's significant potential for emerging technologies in this particular area. So in conclusion, novel processing technologies are not a silver bullet that will replace conventional methods. However, they definitely have key niche applications where they can be very, very successful. If used correctly, they can be greener than conventional methods in those application areas. And if used correctly, they can also maintain and even enhance the quality and indeed the nutritional value in certain foodstuffs. As we learn more about them, we're beginning to realize their true potential, and we're beginning to identify more and more applications and areas where they can be used. However, their ultimate uptake requires interaction between industry and other stakeholder groups to ensure there's traction and to ensure they achieve their true potential. And finally, it is my firm view that they have a definite role to play in the future of food manufacturing. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.